For the wedding, I wrote them a check for $10,000 and gave them a honeymoon package. But instead of, "Thank you," I heard from my son-in-law, "Where did you put my money? You were supposed to return it last month." I didn't understand what money he was talking about. He squeezed my shoulders so hard that I almost cried from the pain. But I gathered all my strength and pushed him away. Then I looked at my daughter and understood everything. I'm Emma, a rather unusual name in our city. But my parents had no other choice. That was the name of both my grandmothers. I love this name very much and I sign all documents only with it. A man's surname never suited me. He himself did not suit me, because he often cheated and drank too much whiskey. My daughter is his copy. Her passion is gambling. It seemed to me that we had overcome this bad habit of hers, even when she was graduating from college. But she could not stop. I blocked all her credit cards. You will not be able to spend family money. If you want to gamble, earn it yourself. But now she has found herself a rich husband and is losing what belongs to him. But in order to remain the perfect girl in his eyes, she borrowed money from him, supposedly for me. She told him that I needed 100,000 to reorganize my business, that I could not get cash quickly, that I had to pay the supplier for the fabric. She promised that it would take a week to return the money. But I did not know anything about these loans. I was supposed to return the money back in September. I'll put you on the meter. You took 400,000 from me, and you return 1 million. And if you don't, I'll take your business. My son-in-law whispered in my ear on the day of his wedding to my daughter. Believe me, he was very convincing. His eyes were bloodshot. For the first time, I saw what kind of beast she had chosen. Before that, he had played the role of a caring and attentive groom. He wondered how I managed to build such a business empire without male hands. Even then, he hinted that he could help, but I would manage my business on my own. I called my daughter, supposedly for a few words, and then I squeezed her hand so hard that she screamed in pain. "Mom, I'll explain everything. Don't tell him anything. I'll find the money and cover your debt," she promised. How could I believe her? The orchestra hiccuped into silence as if the violins had heard the word million and fainted. A waiter froze between us, balancing a tray of oysters and moral judgment. I smiled for the room, the way women my age learn to smile when the world tilts and the floor forgets its job. I set the envelope with my gift back on the table, as if it might grow teeth and testify. "Business is war," the groom, my brand new son-in-law, murmured later as I walked toward the exit. He caught up with me at the coat room, voice low, breath sugared with champagne. "If you pay tomorrow, I'll only add 100. After that, 10 a day. Don't be offended, Mom Emma. I love your daughter, but I love money more." "Good," I said, sliding into my coat. Money will keep you warm when love moves out. Outside, the October air had a clean bite, like an apple that hadn't decided whether to be sweet or mean. I stood under the strings of lights, the venue's hedges trimmed within an inch of their dignity. Across the parking lot, my daughter laughed too brightly beside a cluster of bridesmaids. Her veil floated like a lie you tell yourself so long it thinks it's the truth. I didn't wait for the first dance. I didn't pose with the cake. I left my lipstick on the crystal flute and my pride on the doormat. And I drove home with my hands tight at 10 and 2, the way you do when everything else is sliding. On the highway, memory tapped me on the shoulder. Not the tender kind, the kind that shakes you and tells you the stove is on fire. In 1998, when low-rise jeans were a hate crime, and nobody believed in a woman named Emma, with a bolt of wool and a head full of patterns, I rented a crumbling warehouse 2 blocks from the river and hung my name over the door. Emma. Not and Sons. Not Co. Just me. The way a woman has to announce herself when no one else will. I taught myself to draw properly, to cut without waste, to sew like a prayer you answer with your hands. The first month I sold 6 skirts and a coat. The second, I sold 10 of each. By the following spring, I had 3 seamstresses, Luz, Tamika, and old Mrs. Fong, who wasn't actually old. She just refused to tell me her age and outran us all to lunch. People asked how I did it. I told them the truth. I listened to women. I made waistbands that forgave a second piece of pie. I put pockets where dignity lives. I stitched in hems that could be let down for a promotion or a heartbreak diet. Every skirt, blouse, and pair of pants was hand-sewn, signed on the inspection tag with the initials of the woman who made it. We became a chorus of initials, and the song traveled farther than my state. By the mid-2000s, we were over 100 strong. My cutters knew by touch the difference between good cotton and a liar. My pressers could coax a pleat to stand at attention through August humidity and bad news. I paid health insurance even when it made my accountant pale, because if a person can't breathe, she can't sew, and if she can't sew, I can't sleep. We shipped to boutiques from Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon. A buyer in Chicago once called my jackets honest, and I figured if clothes could strive for virtue, I was raising them right. Then there was my husband. He liked to call himself a whiskey philosopher, which is a poet who only writes when the bottle's open. The night I was supposed to fly to Paris for a show, a storm socked in the airport. I could have slept in a plastic chair. Instead, I drove home in the rain, headlights carving wet diamonds out of the dark. In the hallway, music the soft kind you put on when you mean trouble was playing. The bedroom door stood ajar. I heard her laugh first, then his both voices I knew by heart. I did not need to look, but I looked anyway. There they were, in a tangle of limbs and betrayal, my husband and my friend, making ghosts out of promises. The worst part wasn't the shock, it was the relief. Knowing your suspicions are right takes the ache out of wondering. I closed the door, briefly, like a librarian marking a page, then opened it wide and flipped on the light. "No need to stop," I said. I just remembered I prefer my sheets without a guest list. I knew the next day. I had a lawyer and the marriage contract on the table. He'd laughed at signing it years before. "What's mine is yours, baby," and then had to learn legal vocabulary the hard way. I took half in my name and I took back every stitch I had ever made for him. Suits, shirts, coats. I piled them in the garage and thought about fire. Then I loaded them into my van and drove to the shelter. That's where I met Arthur. Volunteer badge, rolled up sleeves, eyes that had seen the whole parade of human nonsense, and still liked to wave at it. He was my daughter's former psychologist years back, when we'd shoved her gambling into the light and hoped it would shrink. He'd left the clinic to start a small practice, and spent his evenings at the shelter, because he said it reminded him that people grow in cracks the world forgets. He helped me carry those clothes inside. "These are beautifully made," he said, smoothing a lapel with a reverence that was almost a prayer. "They'll make men feel like they've got a shot." We went for coffee, then dinners. He gave me his coat the night the wind came down the river, as if the mountains had taken up whistling. He listened to my work stories and laughed in the right places and quieted in the others. But I wasn't ready. I told him I was married to my factory. He said he respected that. He still called on Sundays to ask what I was reading, and once he sent me a box of antique buttons with mother-of-pearl centers. For the day you decide to sew something only for yourself. At the red light outside the venue, I wanted his arms around me again. Not to make me smaller, but to remind me I was not alone in this loud, ridiculous world. My phone lit up with messages, all of them sugar-coated. "Where did you go? Everything okay? Mum, please don't make a scene." As if I had asked the band to play a subpoena. At home, I walked through my quiet rooms like a woman counting stitches. I poured tea and let it go cold untouched. Then I went to the office at the factory. where the air always hummed with the after-echo of machines and women telling stories over thread. The night guard waved, gave me a look that said he understood about long nights, and I unlocked my desk. The numbers were my friends. They don't flatter and they never forgive, but they tell the truth in neat columns. I pulled purchase orders and vendor contracts and the payroll I sign with a pen that has only ever written my name. Nothing out of place. No cash pulls. No missing checks. If $400,000 had walked through here, it would have left footprints in dust. What it left instead was a daughter who had stumbled off the path I'd laid for her, and into a casino with roses on the wallpaper. I remembered the first time I blocked her cards, how she had screamed that I didn't love her. "I love you enough to make you mad," I'd said. "Find a job that doesn't pay in slot machine music." She'd quit for a while, graduated, helped with the showroom, saved enough to move out. Then a new boyfriend, a new crowd, a new investment. Now a husband with a tie like a choke chain, and a taste for loans that multiply in the dark. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Tomorrow. Bring cash." Followed by an address, a downtown office with a lobby that smelled like marble and caution. I called my bank manager. "Hypothetically," I said, "if a woman needed to withdraw a large sum, say, the kind that makes a teller take off her glasses, how fast could she do it?" "Is this from your personal account, Miss Emma?" she asked. "My company's." A pause. Paper flipping. Protocol waking up and stretching. Company withdrawals over a threshold require co-signatures from all executive managers and board notification, per your own governance policy. Which, if I may remind you, you wrote. "I did," I said, "because I believe in locks even when my own hair is on fire." I hung up and stared at the framed photo on my shelf. Me and my workers at the summer picnic, everyone holding up their hands like a choir, so you could see the needle-pricked fingertips that built our lives. They trusted me to keep the lights on. I wasn't about to dim them for a man who thought interest was something you charge more than you felt. I dialed my daughter. Straight to voicemail. "Sweetheart," I said, and my voice surprised me by not breaking. "You've put your mother in a corner. The thing about corners is, they make you very good at pushing back. Call me." Midnight found me on the cutting table with a chalk pencil in my hand, sketching a dress I didn't need. A habit from the early years, when drawing calmed the dragon in my chest. Ivory crepe, bias cut, pockets deep enough to carry your piece. I thought of the box of buttons on my closet shelf, the ones Arthur had given me because he believed one day I'd make something only for me. The factory's clock clicked over to 12:01. My phone lit up again, another message from the same number. 10 a day starts Monday. "Sleep tight, Mom Emma," I smiled despite myself. Men like him always underestimate women like me. They think we're made of recipes and apologies. They forget we build empires out of thread and stubbornness. I opened my contacts and scrolled to Arthur. My thumb hovered. He'd always answered. He would answer now. For 10 seconds I watched my reflection in the dark office window. A 64-year-old woman with good bones and a spine that had survived worse storms than a man in a tuxedo, threatening compound interest. I pressed call. The line rang once, twice. "Emma?" he said, his voice warm, his concern immediate, like a coat shrugged over my shoulders. "What's wrong?" I took a breath that tasted like steel and jasmine tea. "I might be going to war in the morning," I said lightly. "And I could use a general who knows what's worth winning." "Tell me everything," he said. And I did right up to the part where my daughter's new husband promised to start the meter on my life's work at dawn. Arthur was quiet for a beat that felt like a hand on my back. "Then we don't let him," he said. "Not for a minute." Outside, the river lifted its cool breath to the windows. Inside, I pulled a legal pad toward me and wrote at the top, in block letters that never trembled. Plan. The first bullet point was simple, satisfying, and long overdue. Make him prove the debt. The second, protect the factory. The third, find my daughter before she drowns. I underlined each one twice. Then I looked at the clock again, listening to it tick like a sewing machine in an empty room, and promised myself something I've kept all my life. I would not be afraid. Morning was only a few hours away. So was the lobby that smelled like marble and caution, and the man who loved my daughter, but loved money more. I put away the chalk pencil, turned off the desk lamp, and whispered into the dark, to the machines, to the women whose initials made music in my head. Ladies, rest. Your boss has work to do. And as I slid my phone into my pocket, it buzzed once more this time, with a message that wasn't a threat, but a lifeline. 5 words that landed like a promise. I'll be there at 9. At 9 sharp, Arthur walked into the lobby that smelled like marble and caution, carrying a thermos, and the sort of calm you can only knit yourself after watching 1,000 people fall apart and put themselves back together. He kissed my cheek respectfully, like a man leaving a prayer at a church he doesn't belong to, and said, "Let's begin with the mechanics. Bullies hate paperwork." Upstairs, the son-in-law had rented a suite with glass walls that made privacy feel like a rumor. He greeted us with a grin town cars wear when they double park. 2 men I didn't know stood by the credenza polishing their silence. "Mom, Emma," he said, voice soft. "Did you bring my money? Did you bring my contract?" I countered, opening my notebook. "Because you keep saying I borrowed $400,000. I'm a practical woman. I prefer ink to adjectives." He slid a folder across the table. Inside, a printout of text messages, my daughter's number at the top, her words crawling like ants across my bones. "Mum needs a short bridge. Her vendor is screaming. She can wire back next week. It's guaranteed." Then copies of transfer receipts, all from his personal accounts, but nowhere my signature. Nowhere my company letterhead. A house of cards, yes, but with a few convincing queens. "That proves you loaned money to someone," I said. "It doesn't prove you loaned it to me." "She said it was for you," he replied mildly. "And I believe my wife." "Then you owe my daughter better judgment," I said. "And I owe my therapist a fruit basket for the restraint I am practicing." His grin didn't move. "It's business, not personal. Pay tomorrow. It's only an extra 100. Monday, 10 a day. You understand compounding, Emma? You built a nice thing. Don't make me unbuild it." Arthur leaned forward, voice as tidy as a fresh crease. "To clarify, you're demanding a personal repayment from Ms. Emma for funds never documented as her liability. You're threatening accelerated interest absent a valid promissory note, and collateral seizure without a UCC filing." My son-in-law's eyes slid to Arthur with mild interest. "And you are an adult chaperone," Arthur said, still smiling. "Who reads?" We left with nothing but a clock thrown at our heads. In the elevator, that clock ticked like hail. At the bank, my manager reluctantly confirmed what I already knew. The company's bylaws required dual authorization for any withdrawal over 50,000 and board notification beyond 100. I had, in a fit of prudence, designed my own cage. "We'll need signatures from you and the coup at minimum," she said. "If it's over 100, the CFO as well." "My Q Luz is with her mother in El Paso," I said. "My CFO, Tamika, is allergic to surprises." "Then call them," the manager said, tired but kind. "We'll prep the forms." Tamika picked up on the second ring. "Is the building on fire?" "Not yet," I said. "But I smell smoke." By noon she was in my office with 3 buns of nervous energy and a legal pad that could take a punch. We walked through the options. Emergency board meeting, short-term line of credit. We had one, but tapping it for the wrong reason felt like calling an ambulance for a paper cut. Vendor negotiations to free up cash flow. Every path ran through the same thicket. Paperwork, time, integrity. The one thing we didn't have was time. At 2, my daughter called. "Mum, stop making this dramatic," she said. "The way people tell hurricanes to tone it down for company. Just pay him. It'll be fine." "He says pay him like I keep 1 million in a cookie jar," I said. "He'll settle for 100 tomorrow. Then 10 a day. That's a mugger with a calculator, sweetheart, not a settlement. Don't call him names." Her voice sharpened. "He's my husband. And you're my daughter," I said, softer than I felt. "We can solve this if you tell me the truth. How much did you take?" Silence. I could hear a television somewhere, an ad for a drug that promised to save your life if you didn't mind the side effects. When she finally spoke, it was with all the recklessness of someone who believes confetti can bury consequences. 400. But I can fix it. Please don't tell him anything. If he thinks you're fighting him, he'll double down." "On who?" I asked. "On you?" Silence again. Then, "Just get the money." Click. Arthur watched me set the phone down as if it might bite me. "You okay?" "I am precisely as okay as a swan," I said. Graceful above, paddling like hell underneath. We convened an emergency board meeting at 4. The board is Smallme, Kamika, and Mrs. Fong, who had retired from the floor to watch over us from a chair so upright it could testify in court. Luz joined by video, her mother sleeping in the next room. A desert sunrise bleeding through the blinds. I told them, not the humiliating parts, only the facts with nails in them. There was a debt someone had stapled my name to. There were threats. There was a clock. I proposed we not pay a cent without a legally binding claim, and in parallel we shore up defenses. Notify vendors that any request to change payment details must come from our central office and my email alone. Alert security to deny entry to anyone without a pre-approved reason. Lock our supply room. Double lock our data. "I can sign for 50, Tamika said. "Not because I think we owe this creature money, but because sometimes the cheapest thing you can buy is time." Luz nodded. 50 buys us 5 days before the 10 a day becomes a bonfire. Mrs. Fong held her pen like a conductor's baton. "Spend the 50 on lawyers," she said. "You don't feed a stray dog that bites. You call animal control." We voted. The motion passed. A legal retainer instead of ransom. I called my attorney. Sent the documents. And by dinner time we had a cease and desist drafted that could make a grown bully consider Pilates. At 7, as my staff was leaving, a courier arrived with a bouquet of white lilies so fragrant they could have covered a crime scene, and a card. "Tomorrow, 100. Monday, 10 a day. Sleep tight." I carried the flowers to the dumpster myself, holding them at arm's length like gossip. On the way back, I passed the sewing floor quiet now. The machines asleep like horses after a hard run. I trailed my fingers along a row of half-finished blouses and felt the living weight of what I'd built. I am not sentimental about many things, but thread. Thread has carried me across rivers most people drown in. That night, Arthur made me dinner in his tiny kitchen soup that tasted like someone had believed in me for hours. He listened without interrupting. When he finally spoke, it was the way good men do. To place guardrails on a cliff, not to tell you to stop walking. "You did right to put the money toward counsel," he said. "Predators rely on panic, but we should prepare for his next move." "What is his next move?" I asked. "Pressure," Arthur said. "He'll try to make you the unsafe one. To make your people doubt you. To isolate you from any refuge. Good luck to him, I said, and drank my soup like a toast. Friday morning, the bank called to confirm the legal retainer wire. Also, the manager added awkwardly, a man came in asking how to be added as an authorized signer for your corporate accounts. He had some photocopies, poor ones of your bylaws. I let the silence do some work. Then, what did you tell him? That we would require a board resolution and your presence in person, she said. He left, displeased. I thanked her with the sincerity I reserve for people who keep the wolves outside the fence. Then I called Tamika. It's starting. It never stopped, she said grimly. We're just hearing the louder instruments now. By noon, the texts resumed. Time's up. Clock's running. 10 a day is generous. I put my phone face down and taught a new seamstress how to ease a sleeve cap into an armhole without puckers. You're persuading fabric, I told her. Not ordering it around. Fabric likes to be asked. She laughed. The small relieved laugh people make when they realize failure is not a firing offense here. At 3, my daughter showed up at the factory in a dress that cost more than my first car, and sunglasses you wear when you don't want anyone to know you've been crying. She breezed past the front desk with the royal entitlement of the recently married, and walked into my office like it still belonged to her childhood. Mother, she said. The word like a shoe she'd realized too late didn't fit. You can't keep ignoring him. I can and I will, I said. And I will also ignore you if you keep speaking to me like a bill collector with a tiara. He says if you don't pay, he'll file a lien. He'll tell everyone you're unstable. She put the back of her wrist to her forehead like a fainting couch audition. I warned him you were. You know. She circled her finger at her temple. Dramatic. Sweetheart, I said, and I did not raise my voice because I am too old to let rage do my thinking. You may tell your husband the following. I am dramatic like a thunderstorm, not like a soap opera. If he files anything, our counsel will respond. If he speaks to my staff, security will escort him out. If he touches my bank, he will meet our bylaws, which are sterner than God. She stared at me as if I had grown a new head with better hair. Why are you being so impossible? You raised me to be decisive. I raised you to be honest, I said. Decisive is a flavor, not a meal. She sniffed. Fine, but don't come to the house this weekend. We need space. As if exile were a punishment I hadn't already given myself 100 times to keep us all alive. After she left, I sat in my chair and let myself cry for exactly 3 minutes timed, like a good meeting, for the girl who used to fall asleep in the back room on a heap of muslin while I hemmed, for the woman she had become, all sharp edges and soft excuses, for me, for the ache of loving someone who would sell your good name at a pawn shop if it bought her one more hour of glitter. Then I wiped my face, redid my lipstick women of my generation don't go into battle with a bare mouth, and went back to the floor. Work is a mercy because it is honest. You do a thing. The thing becomes itself. You can hold it. By evening, the legal papers went out certified mail. We locked the doors and I walked the building with the night guard, checking windows, inventory, the hum of the coolers. In my office, a yellow post-it waited on the desk. Tamika's tidy hand. Payroll in by noon tomorrow. Vendor A needs confirmation. Also, you're a dragon. I smiled. I have been called worse mythological creatures. On my way home, I stopped for gas. The man at the next pump was one of the two from the glass office suit off now, sleeves rolled. The vibe of a man who thinks he's invisible because he's not talking. He looked at me, then looked away, then looked again. Evening, he said. Tell your boss, I replied. That compounding goes both ways. So does patience. He smirked, as if patience were a currency he never needed to carry. See you soon, Miss Emma. He got back in his car and drove off without paying company card on file. Probably. Or a clerk too tired to care. At home, their answering machine, the landline. Yes, I have one. I like the way it keeps its own little record of history blinked with 2 messages. The first was my lawyer. We had filed. The clock was now ours to weaned. The second was my mother's voice, old and sweet and long gone, left on the machine years ago by accident and never erased. Emmy, did you leave your scarf here? It's the blue one with the feathers. I'll keep it safe. I sat on the stairs and let that voice do what it always did. Remind me I came from women who saved small things and fought large wars. My phone buzzed once more. A final text that night. A taunt shaped like courtesy. Hope you're resting. Monday is a big day. Your favorite banker. I typed a response and then deleted it. Because the better reply was not words but walls. Instead, I sent Arthur a single sentence. Breakfast at 6? Armor fittings. He sent back a coffee emoji, a sword emoji, and because he can't help himself, a heart. I slept like a general on the eve of a campaign. Badly, but with purpose. Monday, we would move pieces on a board that wasn't designed for women like me to win. Monday, 10 a day would try to bleed into 30, into 50, into the marrow of what I'd built. Monday, I would meet him at the bank again, in that disinfected lobby with its ferns and its quiet security guards and its terrible art. And Tuesday? Well, Tuesday I intended to still own my name on the door, and the lights over my ladies' heads. But between Monday and Tuesday lay a bridge made of paper, signatures, and spine. I buttoned my courage, laid out a suit I'd cut myself years ago, charcoal, excellent pockets, and pinned my mother's blue feathered scarf at the shoulder. I looked in the mirror at a woman men have underestimated their whole lives and said, Emma dear, let's make them cry at our comedy and laugh at our tragedy. Then let's send the bill. Monday arrived like a tax audit, uninvited, inevitable and oddly punctual. The sky was the color of unwashed linen, and I could feel the pressure of a storm hiding just behind the horizon. I brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to file for citizenship and sat by the kitchen window, the morning light sketching faint lines across the blue scarf on my shoulder. My armor, my inheritance. Arthur arrived on time, as always, carrying 2 breakfast sandwiches and a folder thick with paperwork. For the road, he said, placing the food on the counter and the folder in my lap. Eat. You'll fight better with something besides indignation in your stomach. He wasn't wrong. I'd been living on caffeine and revenge fantasies since Thursday. I unwrapped the sandwich and chewed thoughtfully, while he spread out the documents like a general laying out a battle plan. We'll start with this, he said, tapping the first page. A formal statement of dispute. You'll file it at the bank. That freezes any attempt to use the alleged debt as leverage until it's verified. And this? I asked, pointing to a thick packet behind it. Restraining order draft. If he or his people show up at the factory again, we'll have it filed within the hour. My friend in the clerk's office owes me a favor. You have friends everywhere, I said. I volunteer a lot, he said with a grin. You'd be amazed what casseroles can accomplish. At 9, we drove to the bank. I wore my charcoal suit with the perfect pockets and heels, sharp enough to cut a rumor in half. The scarf fluttered in the wind as if reminding me that I'd been through worse than this, and come out pressed and polished. Inside, my son-in-law was already waiting, leaning against the counter, chatting with a young teller whose blush could have boiled the vault. He turned when he saw me, that wolfish smirk in place, all polished teeth and counterfeit charm. Well, if it isn't my favorite mother-in-law, he said. Come to make good on your promise. I never promise things I don't owe, I said, handing the teller my folder. But I do keep appointments. The teller blinked, confused. What is this? Formal dispute, Arthur said smoothly, stepping forward. Per state and federal regulations, any claim involving alleged personal debt under false pretense or forgery must be held pending verification. Ms. Emma is contesting liability. You'll need to log it, timestamp it, and copy it to your compliance officer. The teller's blush deepened. Of course. I'll just, get my manager. My son-in-law's smile faltered. You're really going to make this complicated, aren't you? I didn't make it complicated, I said. Your greed did. I'm just adding punctuation. He leaned in, his voice low. You think paperwork will save you? You think that lawyer boyfriend can protect you? I can crush your little empire with one call. Then make it, I said. But do it in daylight. I've had enough men try to ruin me in the dark. Arthur put a hand on my shoulder, steady but not possessive. We're done here. We turned and walked out before the manager even arrived. Outside, the storm had started to whisper. Wind tugged at the scarf, and for the first time in days I felt like I could breathe. Next step? Arthur asked, unlocking the car. Lunch, I said. Even generals need sandwiches. He smiled. You're handling this better than most people would. I'm handling it the only way I know how, one stitch at a time. By midweek, the retaliation began. It started small. Mysterious calls to my vendors suggesting the company was insolvent. Emails to clients claiming we'd lost our manufacturing license. Then the credit line we'd held for 15 years was suddenly under review. Tamika burst into my office Wednesday morning, waving a stack of printed emails. He's targeting our supply chain, she said. Look at this, 2 of our main fabric distributors are holding shipments until they reassess our credibility. That doesn't happen overnight. He's trying to strangle the business, I said, scanning the pages. If I can't deliver, I can't sell. If I can't sell, I can't pay wages. Classic playbook. Arthur arrived a few minutes later with coffee and a grim expression. He's got money and people willing to make noise. But noise isn't proof. We just have to hold the line until the investigation into the alleged loan is complete. Hold the line, I repeated. I can do that. And I did until Friday afternoon, when my daughter showed up again. This time, she wasn't wearing her mask of superiority. Her eyes were red, her hair unbrushed, her voice small. Mom, she whispered. He's furious. He says you're ruining him. He's threatening to take everything. He's not taking anything that isn't already his, I said. And none of this was his to begin with. She shook her head, trembling. You don't understand. He has papers, contracts, signatures. He says they'll hold up in court. Show me. She hesitated. I can't. He keeps them in the safe. In his house. She nodded. Then we'll get them, I said, standing. Her eyes widened. What? You can't just... Watch me. Arthur, who had been leaning against the doorframe quietly, raised an eyebrow. You're planning a break-in now. Not a break-in, I said. A retrieval of stolen identity. Besides, the house used to be mine. I helped pick the drapes. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Emma, you realize this could go wrong in about 40 legal ways. Arthur, darling, I said, grabbing my purse. Everything worth doing goes wrong at least once. That night, the 3 of us drove out to the estate, me, Arthur, and my trembling daughter. The gates were still coded with her birthday. The irony didn't escape me. Inside, the house glowed like a museum after hours. Every corner gleamed, every surface reflected money and emptiness. I'd lived in houses like that before. They're colder than graveyards. He keeps the safe in the study, my daughter whispered. Behind the painting. Of course, I said. A man that predictable shouldn't be allowed to own art. Arthur stayed near the door, watching the driveway. You have exactly 10 minutes before this turns into an arrest record, We moved quickly. She pulled the painting aside. I examined the keypad. Old habits die hard. I used to sew secret pockets into dresses for women hiding cash from their husbands. I know the rhythm of people's security. He'd pick something simple, 4 digits. I tried his birth year. Nothing. Hers. Still nothing. Then, remembering his obsession with money, I typed 1987. The year the first US dollar coin came out. Click. Inside was several folders, a few envelopes, and a small velvet box. I ignored the jewelry and opened the first folder. Contracts. Dozens of them. Some in my daughter's name, some in mine. All forged. My signature, copied perfectly. The loops, the tilt, even the small flourish I added when I was proud of a deal. My breath caught. That little snake, I muttered. He forged everything, my daughter said. Pale. Mom, I'm so sorry. Don't apologize yet, I said, flipping through the pages. We need copies. Arthur appeared suddenly in the doorway. Time's up. Someone's coming. I snapped photos with my phone as quickly as I could, then shoved the papers back and closed the safe. The painting swung back into place, just as headlights flashed across the driveway. Out the back, Arthur hissed. We slipped through the kitchen and out onto the patio, cutting across the manicured lawn toward the hedges. My daughter stumbled once, heels sinking into the grass. I yanked her up by the arm. You wore stilettos to a rescue mission. Old habit, she gasped. We reached Arthur's car just as another vehicle pulled into the driveway. A black Mercedes with tinted windows. My son-in-law. He got out, phone in hand, laughing into it. Oblivious. Yeah, I told her if she doesn't pay by Monday, I'm taking the company. It's mine now anyway. She just doesn't know it yet. Arthur's hand tightened on the wheel. He's documenting his own threats, he murmured. Thank God for arrogance. We drove away in silence, the sound of tires on gravel like applause from an invisible audience. Back at my house, I uploaded the photos to 3 different flash drives and locked them in separate drawers. Then I sat on the couch, exhausted, watching my daughter pace like a trapped cat. Mom, what do we do now? She asked finally. We breathe, I said. Then we fight smarter. Arthur placed a hand on my shoulder. Those contracts, if a forensic specialist confirms the forgeries, we can dismantle his claims entirely. But he won't stop. He'll escalate. He already has, I said quietly. But so have I. My daughter looked up, fear and hope warring in her eyes. You're not scared? I'm 64, I said. Fear is for people who still think they can be ruined. I stood, smoothing my scarf. Tomorrow we go to the police. We show them the evidence. And if that doesn't work, we go to the press. I built my name with my own 2 hands. I won't let a counterfeit steal it. Arthur smiled proud, maybe even a little in awe. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Oh, Arthur, I said, smiling back, it's not so bad. I only destroy those who deserve it. Outside, thunder rolled and the first drops of rain hit the windows like punctuation marks. Tomorrow I would march into the police station. Tomorrow I would expose the lies. But tonight, sitting between the man who believed in me and the daughter who finally saw what her choices had cost, I allowed myself one quiet moment of victory. Because I had proof. And proof, in the hands of a woman like me, is sharper than any blade. By morning, the rain had rinsed the world clean, but my anger still clung like damp wool. I barely slept, though Arthur did, sitting upright in the armchair across from my sofa, head tilted, one hand still holding the folder of photographs like a man protecting treasure. He looked peaceful, the kind of peace that only comes to people who've made peace with their own storms. When I woke him, he blinked once, smiled faintly, and said, You didn't sleep, did you? I'll sleep when the truth files its taxes, I said, pouring coffee. We've got a date with the police. We reached the precinct just before 8. The desk sergeant looked at me the way people do when they recognize a familiar name, but can't decide from where. You're the lady from the clothing place, right? My wife loves your blouses. Hand sewn, yeah? That's me, I said. And if we do this right, I'll keep being that lady from the clothing place instead of that lady on the evening news. He chuckled, then sobered when Arthur handed him the flash drive. Forgery, extortion, threats, Arthur said succinctly. The man's name is… Let's not say it here, I interrupted. I like to save dramatic reveals for better lighting. The sergeant smirked. All right, Miss Emma, we'll log it, open a report. Might take a few days to verify. Days? I raised an eyebrow. Officer, he's already threatening my company. By next week he'll have repossessed my sewing machines and sold them on Craigslist. I understand, he said gently. But the wheels of justice turn slower than my old singer, I finished for him. Got it. Arthur placed a reassuring hand on my back as we left. We've done what we can for now. Paperwork is power, but it's also molasses. Well, I said, slipping on my sunglasses. Then we heated up. By noon, word had already begun to trickle through town. Someone had leaked that the police were investigating Emma. My vendors grew cold. 2 of my seamstresses called in sick fear, has a way of spreading like smoke through fabric. Tamika stormed into my office, furious. This is sabotage, she said. He's poisoning your name. I know, I said. And that means he's scared. Scared enough to go for the throat. Then I'll make sure he chokes on it. Arthur arrived soon after, a brown paper bag in hand. Inside was a sandwich and a stack of printed emails. From a friend in the bank, he explained. Apparently, your charming son-in-law has been trying to access your company's accounts using those forged contracts. The bank froze everything pending verification. He's furious. I smiled. Good, let him sweat. Maybe he'll finally understand how women feel in menopause. Arthur laughed, then turned serious. Emma, you realize he's not going to stop until he thinks he's broken you. Then he'll die disappointed, I said. But inside I felt a tremor. Because the truth is, it's easier to face a war when you can see your enemy coming. His silence over the next 2 days scared me more than his threats. On Friday morning, the quiet broke. I was at the factory floor, reviewing a new spring line, a symphony of soft pastels, gentle linen, and thread that glowed faintly under the lights, when Tamika came running in, phone in hand. He's here, she gasped. Where? Outside. With movers. I walked to the front doors. Through the glass, I saw 2 trucks idling, 4 men in overalls unloading dollies. My son-in-law stood in the rain, waving a sheaf of papers like a victory flag. Emma, he called. You're late on your payments. I'm here to collect. The employees gathered behind me, whispering. I raised a hand for silence and opened the door. The rain hit my face like applause. You picked the wrong day for nonsense, I said. According to this, he held up a paper one of the forged contracts. No doubt. I have full rights to seize any and all company assets in lieu of payment. I took a step closer. That paper has as much legal weight as a grocery list. He sneered. Tell it to the police. I already have, I said. And they'll be very interested to know you're impersonating a lien holder without due process. His smirk faltered. You can't stop me. I don't need to, I said, tilting my chin toward the security booth. He can. Our night guard, a sweet, broad-shouldered veteran named Ray, stepped out holding his radio like a weapon. Sir, you and your men are trespassing. Leave now or I'll call it in. My son-in-law's face reddened. This isn't over, Emma. Oh, I know, I said cheerfully. Nothing ever is. That's why we have sequels. He left, but not before shouting, "You'll regret this." I regret my first marriage, I called after him. You don't even make the top 5. The door shut behind me to a chorus of muffled laughter from my staff. For a moment the tension broke, replaced by something lighter hope, maybe. But when I turned back, I saw my daughter standing near the stairs, drenched and shaking. Her mascara streaked like charcoal tears. He hit me, she whispered. Arthur was beside her in seconds, his face hardening into something I'd never seen before. When? Last night. He was drunk. He said I embarrassed him. I ran. I reached out, pulling her into my arms. For the first time in years, she didn't resist. You did the right thing, I said. You're safe now, she sobbed into my shoulder. Mom, it's worse than that. I found something. Something you need to know. Arthur and I exchanged a glance. What is it? He asked. She wiped her face, trembling. It's about Dad. The room seemed to tilt. What about him? She took a deep breath. He and my husband. They know each other. They've known each other for years. I frowned. What are you saying? I found letters. Old ones. He wasn't just my husband. He's... Her voice broke. He's my half-brother, Mom. The world stopped. Machine's words somewhere behind us. A low hum like blood in my ears. What? I whispered. She nodded, sobbing harder now. Dad used him. He wanted revenge on you for the divorce, for taking half of everything. He told his son all this time to ruin you. He made him seduce me. Arthur swore softly under his breath. I stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the table for balance. No, that's not. But it was. It made an awful, perfect kind of sense. The way the boy had seemed too interested in my business. The convenient charm. The subtle digs about my past. I had thought he was just an ambitious man. He was an instrument. Mom, my daughter sobbed. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know. I sank into a chair, my pulse thundering. For a moment, I saw my ex-husband's face smiling, smug, holding that glass of whiskey he always thought made him look important. If you leave me, he'd once said, you'll regret it forever. I thought he meant emotionally. I didn't realize he was planting the seeds of a vendetta that would bloom 20 years later in my own child's life. Arthur crouched beside me, his hand warm on mine. Emma, breathe. I am, I said. I'm just choosing not to scream yet. My daughter knelt at my feet. Mum, what do we do? I looked down at her, this fragile, foolish girl who had inherited my stubbornness and her father's hunger for danger. For the first time, I didn't see her as a child. I saw her as a woman who'd been weaponized. We fight smarter, I said finally. But this time, we don't just defend. We strike back. Arthur nodded. You're thinking what I think you're thinking. Oh yes, I said, standing. It's time to pay a visit to my ex-husband. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the world still smelled like electricity. And I, for the first time in years, felt exactly like a storm about to strike. If I'd been 20 years younger, I might have cried first. But at 64, I've learned that tears are only valuable when used strategically, never wasted, always timed. So instead of crying, I put on lipstick. Arthur watched from the kitchen doorway as I lined my lips with the precision of a general drawing battle lines. You're sure you want to see him alone? He asked. No, I said, blotting the color with a napkin. But I've waited too long to watch another man take center stage in my story. He studied me for a moment, that soft, steady way of his. You always walk into fire like you've rehearsed it. Darling, I said, reaching for my coat. That's because I usually have. My ex-husband lived in the kind of house that screamed money but whispered taste. Polished stone, a circular driveway, a fountain that spat water like an overfed ego. The gate opened for me automatically. I suppose the devil never deletes old numbers. He was waiting on the veranda, wearing a navy sweater and that familiar smirk that had once made me weak, then furious, then rich. "Well, if it isn't my favorite entrepreneur," he said, raising a glass of amber whiskey. "Still sewing your little skirts? Still drinking your breakfast?" I countered. He chuckled. "You haven't changed." "Oh, I have," I said, stepping closer. "I stopped forgiving men who mistake cruelty for cleverness." He looked at me the way one studies a rare species, half amusement, half curiosity. "You're upset. I assume this is about your son-in-law." I tilted my head. "You mean your son?" For the first time, his expression cracked. Just slightly, but enough for me to see the truth underneath. "You know," he said after a pause, "I always admired that detective streak of yours. Should have been a journalist instead of a seamstress." "I was a wife instead of a detective," I said. "That was my mistake." He sipped his whiskey, eyes gleaming. "I didn't plan for it to go that far. I only wanted him to humble you a little. A taste of what you did to me. You took half my money, Emma. I took half because you were sleeping with my best friend." He shrugged. "Water under the bridge. Tell that to your daughter," I snapped. "Because that bridge nearly destroyed her." He flinched, just a flicker. "She wasn't supposed to find out." I told him to handle it cleanly. "Seduce her, marry her, get close to your business, squeeze until you broke, then leave. Simple." "Simple," I repeated, my voice trembling not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of his rot. "You used your own son as a weapon." "He's not exactly innocent," he said dryly. "He wanted in on the plan. Easy money, easy power. Chip off the old block." "You're not a block," I hissed. "You're a sinkhole." He smiled again, slow, deliberate. "Oh, Emma, always dramatic. You can file your lawsuits, run your little factory, even play the martyr. But deep down, you know you enjoyed the fight. It's what kept us together all those years. You and I, we only feel alive when someone's bleeding." I stepped closer until I could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You're right," I said. "And today it won't be me." Before he could respond, I took the envelope from my purse and dropped it onto his patio table. Inside were copies of the forged contracts, photos from the safe, and a written statement I'd already filed with the police. "Consider this your preview," I said. "By tomorrow, your son will be under investigation for fraud, forgery, and extortion. And since your letters link you directly to him, the police will come for you too." He didn't touch the envelope. "You think you can ruin me, Emma?" "No," I said, smiling. "I think you'll do that yourself. I'm just making sure you have good lighting when you fall." I turned to leave, but his voice followed me, smooth, venomous. "You always were vindictive. And you always underestimated embroidery," I called back. "Because it's the art of holding something together after it's been pierced 1,000 times. By the time I got home, the adrenaline had settled into my bones like a second heartbeat. Arthur met me at the door, anxious. "Well?" he confessed, I said simply, hanging up my coat. Half gloated, half bragged. I recorded it. I tapped the phone in my pocket. Arthur exhaled. "You're terrifying," he said softly, almost admiringly. "I prefer efficient," I said. "Terrifying is just the side effect." We spent the evening reviewing the recording, preparing transcripts, and packaging everything for the police. My daughter stayed quiet through most of it, curled on the sofa, her eyes distant. Finally, she spoke. "I want to help," she said. I can testify. I can tell them what he did. You will, I said gently. But not yet. First, you need to heal. This isn't your fault. She shook her head. But it is. I borrowed the money. I lied to him. I stopped her with a raised hand. You borrowed forgiveness too many times, darling. But this debt isn't yours. Arthur nodded in agreement. Let Emma handle the fire. She's built for it. I smiled faintly. Fire doesn't destroy me, sweetheart. It tailors me. The next day, everything began to unravel, just not in the way I expected. By noon, the police called. My ex-husband's accounts were being frozen pending investigation. My son-in-law, her husband, her half-brother, was officially wanted for questioning. The forged contracts were enough to open a criminal case. And yet, I felt no victory, only exhaustion. I walked through the factory, watching the women at their machines. The rhythm of their work was soothing, like a heartbeat that didn't need fixing. Luz hummed softly. Tamika argued with a thread spool. For a moment I thought this is what I built for. Not the money, not the reputation, the constancy. The way honest work keeps your hands from shaking. Arthur found me there an hour later, leaning against a cutting table. You did it, he said quietly. It's over. Is it? I asked. Because winning against evil doesn't make you good. It just makes you tired. He smiled gently. Then rest. I will, I said, when justice stops needing supervision. He chuckled. You know, Emma, there's a reason I fell in love with you. I blinked. You what? He froze, color rising in his cheeks. Did I not mention that before? No, I said, crossing my arms. But it's about time someone did. He laughed, and for the first time in weeks, the sound didn't echo off grief. That evening, as the sun slipped below the horizon, I sat with my daughter on the porch. The air smelled like honeysuckle, and something new hope, maybe. Mum, she said softly, how do you do it? How do you survive everything? I smiled at her, the way only mothers can when they've seen every version of their child and still love them all. By remembering who I am, not who they say I am. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I want to be like you someday. No, I said, pulling her close. Be better. She laughed through her tears. You always say that. That's because it's always true. Later, after she went inside, I stood on the porch alone. The sky was purple and bruised, like an old scar healing from the inside out. Arthur stepped out beside me, his hand brushing mine. It's not over, you know, he said. They'll drag this out. Court, hearings, appeals. I know, I said. But I've waited 20 years for closure. What's a few more months? He nodded. You're incredible. I turned to him. Arthur, I said softly, do you still have that box of buttons you gave me years ago? He smiled. Of course. Good. I think I'm finally ready to sew something for myself. But peace, as always, is fragile. The next morning, a courier delivered a plain white envelope addressed in my own handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. If you think this is over, Emma, you've forgotten how many sons I have. Ah. I stared at the signature, my blood turning to ice. Arthur read it over my shoulder, then placed a hand on my arm. You know what this means? Yes, I said, folding the note carefully, as though politeness could tame the venom in it. It means part 2 of this war has just begun. When a man like my ex-husband declares war, he doesn't march in with cannons. He seeps in through cracks, paperwork, rumors, lawyers with smiles too wide for their teeth. By Tuesday morning, I could already feel the air tightening around me. The newspapers ran a headline so slippery it could have been written by an eel. Local fashion mogul under investigation for financial misconduct. No names yet, but everyone in town knew who the local mogul was. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree, some friends pretending to check on me, others sniffing for gossip. I spent the morning fielding calls from vendors, lawyers, and one particularly nosy cousin who suddenly remembered she'd always admired my resilience. By noon, I'd already fired off 5 rebuttal letters and chewed through 2 cups of black coffee and 1 cinnamon roll. Arthur watched from my office doorway, arms crossed, concern carved into the lines of his face. "He's trying to isolate you again," he said. "Same playbook." "He's welcome to try," I replied, straightening a stack of invoices. "I fought smarter devils than him." He smiled softly. "You've also made better clothes." "Well," I said, "stitching up my enemies is just another form of tailoring." But he was right. My ex-husband wasn't attacking the way he used to with fists or affairs. He was attacking with influence. By Friday, 2 of my key investors had pulled out of upcoming projects, citing reputational concerns. The bank delayed a critical loan renewal, and the local business association, which I'd helped found, suddenly postponed my keynote speech. That's how you erase a woman in America. Not by burning her at the stake, but by quietly removing the microphone. I could feel my empire wobbling like a skirt hem someone tugged too hard. Arthur and I spent every night at my kitchen table, piecing together the evidence trail like detectives with insomnia. We drafted affidavits, transcribed recordings, and looped in Tamika, who was a wizard with spreadsheets and righteous anger. "He's spreading poison through your network," she said, tapping at her laptop. "Look, 3 of our suppliers got anonymous calls from clients saying you're under criminal audit." "He's using back channels, Emma." "Then we'll use front ones," I said. "People like him hide behind whispers. Let's give him a stage light." Arthur looked at me. "You're thinking press conference?" "Exactly. I'll tell the truth myself before he sells his version wholesale." Tamika grinned. "Remind me to never cross you." "You wouldn't survive it," I said sweetly, and she burst out laughing. We held the press conference the following Monday in the lobby of my factory, surrounded by the hum of sewing machines and the scent of freshly pressed cotton. I stood behind a podium draped with one of our signature fabrics, soft ivory, with blue embroidery, the same shade as my mother's scarf. The women I employed stood behind me, shoulder to shoulder. 25 years ago, I began. I opened this factory with 1 sewing machine, 3 women, and a dream that didn't fit inside anyone else's definition of what a woman should do. Flashes went off. I didn't blink. Last week, a man I once trusted began spreading lies about me, claims of fraud, forgery, and financial misconduct. I'm here today not just to deny them, but to expose the real story. The evidence is with the police, the courts, and now you. My ex-husband and his illegitimate son, who also happens to be my daughter's husband, conspired to destroy what I built. They forged documents, manipulated bank records, and threatened my family. They thought I'd stay silent to protect my reputation. I looked into the cameras. But I built my reputation from the ground up. It can survive a storm. The reporters scribbled like mad. One young woman raised her hand. "Miss Emma, are you saying your ex-husband orchestrated this out of revenge?" "Yes," I said simply. "Because hell hath no fury like a man who loses half his assets to a woman who earned every cent of hers." The room broke into whispers. When it was over, Arthur squeezed my hand. "You were magnificent." "I was truthful," I said. "Magnificent is just the aftertaste." That night, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. "Still dramatic," came my ex-husband's voice. "You always loved an audience." "I learned from the best," I said. He laughed a dry, brittle sound. "You think public sympathy will save you? The legal system doesn't care about speeches." "No," I said. "But it does care about recordings." Silence. Then, a low growl. You wouldn't. Oh, I would, I said, smiling into the receiver. In fact, I already did. I hung up before he could respond. Arthur watched from across the table, eyebrows raised. That was him, wasn't it? Yes. And you just taunted him. I call it female diplomacy. He chuckled. I adore you. Good, I said. You're about to marry me. He blinked. Excuse me? I shrugged, nonchalant. You said you adore me. I'm practical. Let's make it official. Arthur's face softened. Are you serious? As a tailor with perfect measurements. He laughed, one of those deep, disbelieving laughs that crumple a man's careful calm. Emma, I've waited years for you to say that. Then don't make me wait for dessert, I said. Let's do this properly. Small ceremony, ivory dress, good music, and for heaven's sake, no wedding cake tears taller than my self-respect. He grinned. You've got a deal. The next month passed like a slow exhale. The legal cases began to roll in. Investigators swarmed the financial trails, and my ex-husband's reputation started to crack in the places only truth can reach. His son, my cursed son-in-law, vanished, running from both the law and the shame that followed him like a ghost. My daughter stayed with me, rebuilding herself piece by piece. We worked side by side in the design room, where she learned to cut and sew for the first time in her life. I didn't tell her, but watching her mend seams felt like watching time itself apologize. Then, one morning, Arthur proposed properly. He brought breakfast on a tray, pancakes, shaped like hearts, slightly lopsided, and slipped a ring box beside the maple syrup. I'm terrible at kneeling, he said. But I'm good at staying. I laughed until I cried. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Our wedding was small, just as I'd wanted. In the garden behind the factory, under strings of white lights, surrounded by the hum of laughter and the smell of magnolia. I wore the dress I'd sewn myself, a soft ivory silk that fell in quiet ripples, with mother-of-pearl buttons down the back. Not white. I'd used that color once already in my life, and I believe in saving it for the dreams that haven't yet been betrayed. Arthur wore a charcoal suit that fit him like forgiveness. When he took my hands, he said, You taught me that strength isn't loud. It's the silence that follows when you choose yourself. And when I looked into his eyes, I finally understood something my mother used to say. Love isn't the fire. It's the steady hand that keeps you from burning. After the ceremony, Tamika handed me a glass of champagne and whispered, You realize you've outlived their story, right? The husband, the son, the scandal. They're footnotes now. I clinked my glass against hers. Good, I said. I've always preferred being the headline. But as the music played and Arthur led me across the grass, I felt the faintest echo of my ex-husband's voice in the back of my mind. If you think this is over, Emma. I smiled. Oh, I do, I whispered to the wind. Because for once, the story's mine. And under the glow of those soft lights in the dress I'd sewn with my own hands, surrounded by people who had chosen me, not for my name, or my money, or my mistakes, I finally danced without armor. For the first time in decades, I was free. For a while, perhaps the length of one good summer, I truly believed peace had come to stay. The factory thrummed again with laughter and light. Orders poured in from new boutiques. The press loved the story of the seamstress who stood up to scandal. My daughter and I found a rhythm, not the old, fragile one made of guilt and silence, but something sturdier, stitched with honesty. And Arthur, dear Arthur, settled into my life like a song I'd always known the melody to, but had forgotten the words. We spent evenings on the porch, coffee cooling between us, watching the sun slide down behind the cottonwoods. I caught him smiling sometimes for no reason at all, and he'd say, Just making sure you're still real. I'd laugh. I'm as real as the wrinkles, darling. But I wasn't naive. Peace is never a gift. It's a lease. And mine came with conditions I hadn't read yet. The first sign came quietly. A letter, delivered not by courier this time, but by a child on a bicycle. No return address, only my name, Emma. Inside, a single photograph. My ex-husband, sitting on a beach somewhere sunny, drink in hand, grin in place. Scrawled across the back. You can't exile the man who taught you empire. Arthur found me standing at the kitchen counter, staring at it. Is that? Yes. I thought he'd been indicted. He was. But men like him don't serve time. They serve cocktails. Arthur frowned. What will you do? Nothing, I said, sliding the photo into a drawer. He's a ghost, and ghosts only haunt you if you let them. I believed it when I said it. I wanted to. A week later, a representative from a major retail chain came to visit the factory at all. Sharp man named Wallace, with the kind of handshake that feels like a contract and a smile that feels like debt. Miss Emma, he said, we'd like to carry your line nationally. Your story resonates with women. Empowerment, resilience, it's gold. Arthur and Tamika were thrilled, but I hesitated. What's the catch? Just a small branding adjustment, Wallace said smoothly. We'd market it as the Emma Collection by Raymond & Co. They already have distribution channels. You'd be the face. They'd handle logistics. The name hit me like a stone to the ribs. Raymond & Co. Yes, he said, oblivious. Founded by Raymond Collins, your ex-husband, I believe. He reached out to propose a joint venture. Said he wanted to make amends. Arthur's hand found mine under the table. I squeezed back hard enough to crack pearls. Thank you, Mr. Wallace, I said evenly. But tell Raymond that my brand already has a name, and it's mine. He blinked, confused. You're sure? This could triple your revenue. Money is like whiskey, I said. Too much and you start confusing it with love. He left, bewildered. Tamika exhaled. He's trying to buy you back. No, I said, eyes narrowing. He's trying to rename me. Arthur shook his head. The man doesn't know when to quit. He's never had to, I said. But maybe it's time he learned. I spent that night in my studio, the old singer humming under my hands. I wasn't sewing for clients. I was sewing something for him. A coat. Fine wool, deep navy, lined with red silk. Elegant, masculine, and if you looked closely stitched on the inside hem, were 3 words in tiny embroidery thread. Return to sender. I boxed it up and sent it to his beach address the next morning, along with a note written in my neatest script. You always liked wearing what I made. Here's one more for the road. Try not to spill whiskey on it. Emma. I never heard back. But sometimes silence is the best applause. D. His son lingered in bureaucratic limbo, half buried under legal motions, half choked by money. Still, the truth was public now, and that was enough. My daughter began teaching design at a community college. One day, she brought home a group of her students to tour the factory. Watching her explain pattern making and fabric weight, with that same spark I once had, I felt something loosen inside me. The chain of inheritance finally shifting from pain to creation. Later, as she packed up, she hugged me. You were right, she said. Work heals. It also hides, I said softly. That sometimes hiding is part of healing. Winter came with snow thick enough to silence the world. Arthur and I stayed home most nights, reading by the fire. He had this habit of marking the margins of my favorite novels with little notes, tiny observations about me hidden between Dickens and Austen. One night I found one that read, She still checks the door twice before bed, but she no longer locks her heart. I kept that page open on my knitstand. Then, on Christmas morning, a small package arrived wrapped in brown paper. No return address. Inside was a piece of fabric. At first, I didn't understand. It was an old sample one of mine from the early days. EMMA, stitched in white thread across soft blue linen. But someone had cut it unevenly, leaving the last letter hanging by a single thread, the A half torn. Arthur looked at it, his brow furrowed. What does it mean? I smiled sadly. It means he's still angry I didn't break. Do we report it? No, I said, placing the fabric into the fire. We let it burn. It's his last word. I prefer silence. He wrapped his arm around me. You sure? Completely, I said. The trick to surviving men like him isn't fighting them forever. It's refusing to let them edit your piece. The fabric curled and blackened in the flames, the thread glowing briefly before disappearing. That night, I dreamed of my mother. She was sitting at her old kitchen table, stitching a patch onto my childhood dress. Everything tears eventually, she said in that calm voice I'd forgotten I missed. But if you mend it yourself, it becomes yours again. I woke up with the dawn, slipped out of bed, and went to my sewing room. The singer waited, quiet and loyal. I laid out ivory silk, the last of the batch I'd saved for myself, and began cutting. By noon, the new line had a name. Mended. Every tag bore those 7 letters, along with a stitched symbol of a phoenix rising from thread. Because that's what women like me do. We rise not because the world stops hurting us, but because it never could. When the first snow melted, I held a small launch party. My daughter wore one of the new coats. Arthur poured champagne, and Tamika toasted, "To the boss who refuses to die quietly." We laughed, and for once it wasn't the kind of laughter you earn through pain. It was the kind that simply belongs. I looked around the room at the women I'd trained, the man I loved, the daughter I'd finally reclaimed, and I realized something that startled me. I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had kept me alive, but love was what would keep me living. After the guests left, Arthur and I sat in the empty factory, lights still twinkling, fabric rolls stacked like silent witnesses. He took my hand. "You did it," he said softly. "You turned every wound into something that fits." I smiled. "Well, darling, I've always believed life's just a series of alterations. You either fix it or it unravels." He kissed my forehead. "What now?" I looked around the vast, warm room, the machines gleaming in the half-light. "Now," I said, "we teach other women to sew their own armor." And with that, I switched off the lights, one by one, until only the sign above the door glowed in the dark. Emma. It had survived storms, betrayal, theft, and lies. But tonight, it stood for something new. Not the name of a factory, not a brand, not even a woman. It stood for every thread that refused to snap. And that, I thought, is the most beautiful thing I've ever made.